Alright, so here are two Yag Panthers, or however you pronounce them. So these were just primered with this on a brush. Sorry, I don't really know where the camera is. And then they were painted with Vallejo's Middle Stone and given an overall wash of, where is it? Citadel's Agrax Earthshade. Those steps are pretty simple, but yeah, here's the wash right here. But as you can see, it's pulled up pretty significantly on the sides and the flat surfaces, and that's where the advantage of a pin wash is you won't have the pooling like you see all over here. And there are a few ways you can go ahead and remedy this. I use the same technique on these Soviet tanks, and because they are you need a lot more of them, I just went ahead and dry brushed all over them, and you can still see it in some places, but overall it's pretty good. Here is an example of where the dry brush wasn't as thorough, and you can still see where it's pooling. Or the other solution you can do is what I'm about to do right now, and all that consists of is taking the base color, taking a brush. Let's see, which one do I want to use? I'll go ahead and use a number 2. And just going ahead and carefully layering it all over. And ensuring that you have a nice consistent finish. This takes a very long time, but the results are very, very good. And when you are working with paints like this for a long period of time, it's important to make sure your paint stays nice and fluid. You want a consistency of milkish. You want to apply nice, even, thin layers. And you want to go ahead and just do it like I'm doing right now. I go ahead and sometimes I dip my brush in the bristles and do it like that. Other times I dip the bottom in and just make it all covered in water, depending on how long the paint's been out, how much paint I'm using. I'm not using a whole lot of paint right now, so that's why I'm just dipping the brush into it. And yeah, this part is relatively boring, but it's a very good way to relax. And it will go on like this. Alright, so here's the finished base coated tank destroyer. So like I said, it is relatively time consuming. About 88 minutes to go from here to here, but it looks better than just dry brushing would give you, especially on a lighter color. And now with this, you notice that the yellow didn't exactly cover all these areas. You see some with the base coat still showing through here, a little bit here, but that isn't too much of a concern. You will see why. Other areas are not very neat, like this one. Again, I'll show you why the dry brush will go ahead and cover a lot of this. And I did not even bother to touch these, like the grill areas. Again, the dry brush will cover that. Dry brushing is your best friend. It lets you go ahead and get away with a lot. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start on the camouflage. And for this, we're going to do the brown first. You'll need middle stone and I think German camo medium brown. The actual color isn't too important as long as you like how it looks. I kind of like the warmer color of the medium. You can go ahead and use just like black brown too. So I'll go ahead and my middle stone is running low, so I'll just get like a drop there. You're going to go ahead and make a 50-50 mix of this color. Make sure you shake your paints pretty well. So here we go. Doesn't really matter too much. And now I have a bigger brush. You can use a bad brush for this, but my brushes are kind of bad, as you can see. So this technique is called stippling, and just mix the colors together. And this probably needs more brown, but you know, it's better to go ahead and be more subtle than you need, and just go ahead and paint your camouflage on like that. You know, the camouflage wasn't really dictated by anybody, so the crews would apply it as they saw fit. So unless you have an example, you are pretty much at free reign to do whatever you want. I did not use nearly enough brown for this. Anyways, you want to make this initial one pretty wide. You know, I don't think that medium brown was the right color to use for this, but you know, we're already started, so let's go ahead and do it. It's been a while since I've done this, so it's kind of hard for me to remember what colors I really like. But I'm not, again, like if I were concerned about modern historical accuracy, I would take a photograph of a specific vehicle and just go ahead and do that. Make sure you put some on the gun barrel. And I'm going to switch brushes after this because this is a pretty big brush. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to add more of that color there. And again, your brush doesn't need to be nice. This is the one that I will be using now. In fact, a brush without long bristles may be even better because it means that you get to control the dabs more. Doesn't need to be exactly dry because if it's a little wet, it'll blend some. And you're just going to go ahead and focus this color on the inside of that color, and you see it starts to look kind of feathered, like you were spray painting it. And you see why, like, the quality of the brush doesn't really matter, because it gets that darker color on the outside sometimes, and you know, that's perfect because it looks like it's just, you know, some crew member messed up when he was spraying it and got a little bit everywhere. Again, as far as I know, camouflage was not applied in the factories like it is nowadays. In fact, even American vehicles, up until the paint we use right now, all the colors were applied in the field based on whatever paints the commander had at hand. So the reason it's not done that way anymore is because the paint we use now is like special, you know, like radar blocking or shit like that. Like, for example, in that book I tried to send you, they were talking about how they were trying to paint the interior of the vehicle, but they got it wrong. So the interior of their tank destroyer was blue instead of white or gray, because they just completely mixed the wrong color. And what's interesting about this paint is it was used, I believe the solvent was gasoline. So they would go ahead and mix gasoline with the paint they got from the factory. Alright, and as you can see, it's starting to look pretty feathered. And now, we're just going to go ahead and use pure medium brown. And I need to use even a smaller brush. And these, when you go ahead and do this, you want your paint a little thick. So we're going to go ahead and use this. Like I said, it's a crappy brush, but it doesn't need to be good for this step. This is probably too crappy of a brush. Yeah, you see how this brush is hooking like that? This brush is garbage and I need to throw it out. Let's see. This brush should be good. Yep. This might be a little bit too small, but like you saw with the other one, you know, it'll go ahead and spread out. And if you don't like the way this looks on like a test piece, you can always just go ahead and add another layer in between. This is a relatively small scale, so it doesn't matter too much if you're going to work with a larger scale. You might want a smoother transition. But I'm okay with this. It'll go ahead and be toned down when we do the dry brush too. And don't worry too much about getting this in the deep areas, because you can always just apply like a direct wash, like a pin wash to this. I used to go ahead and do this before I did the wash overall, and that would really tie it in, but I changed techniques. So I also used to have like a special brush for this that I just cut the tips off of, and that was kind of nice too, but I don't know what happened to it. I've moved too much and lost a lot of stuff. As you can see, the dabbing on this side looks a little bit better than this side. But yeah, I mean, like, you can do soft edge camouflage without an airbrush. It's just gotta be creative. I kind of like not using an airbrush because it makes me, again, you know, if I had an airbrush, I wouldn't know anything about these techniques, and I'd have to go ahead and every time I wanted to paint a vehicle, I would have to set up a booth and all that. And knowing these techniques also is useful for other areas. Like, I used to use a very similar method to paint my helmets. Is I would just go ahead and like dab it on top, because you know, you want, the helmet is a spherical surface and it's hard to go ahead and do highlights on that. And I'm not going to go ahead and videotape the green part, but when I go ahead and have both parts together, I'll show you the final step. And also, if you ever wanted to, you don't need to put on all three colors, because the Germans were strapped for supplies, especially in late war. So sometimes you'd see tanks come out directly in the primer, and what a lot of units would do is that they would just go ahead and apply Dunkelgelb, the yellow paint, on top of primer, so you'd have splashes of primer and yellow paint, and that would be the only camouflage they had. Alright, so we go ahead and we have the green finished, and I did a little bit of pin wash in some areas, not too much, mostly like along the edges here where the sides meet the camouflage patterns. And so what a dry brush is, it's easier to show than describe. So you need to go ahead and get some paint. A lot of paint. And this brush is junk because I dry brush with it so much. Again, it's indicative of the name, should be dry. And what you do is you load up the paint, and I usually just do it on my palette here, is you want to get most of that paint off. Right, so again, I usually test it on my finger, is you want it to not really show up. And what I talked about earlier is, like, you know, you could dry brush this color onto here, but it just wouldn't, well, that doesn't look too bad. But, you know, I just think the other way looks nicer, and you know, you can do that a lot quicker. So what you do is you take that color, as you can see on my finger, it's not getting any of that color, and just go at an angle. And what this does is it'll go ahead and tie in all the camouflage patterns more. It will soften the edges and bring them all, make it look nice and pretty. And now, you know, it's just go until you like the look. You can definitely go overboard with dry brushing, especially at this stage. But, you know, I mean, what it does is it goes ahead and like picks out these girls in the actual color, because those are hard to get to when you're brush painting. Like, you really start to see the edges of the camouflage soften up right now. Like I said, this will destroy your brushes, so you don't need a $30 brush to do this. Just go ahead and buy a cheap one. A lot of people like flat ones. I just do whatever. And then after this, we are going to go ahead and mix our, I dry brush the wheels too. So we're going to go ahead and take our Middlestone color that's already on the palette and Iraqi sand. Shake it up. Add it. And now I don't usually mix paints like this, but a lot of people do. So that's a lot of Iraqi sand, so we're just going to take a little bit more Middlestone, because it's bad for your brushes to mix your paints that way. But I mean, I'm dry brushing, so it's bad for the brush no matter what. If you do decide to mix your paints that way, just clean it up immediately. Most of the time, I go ahead and mix my paints like this. But as you can see, this is a lot easier, especially with a well-used palette like mine. And now when you do mix your brushes like that, you got to go ahead and make sure that the paint is off, because that'll get it deep into there. And now this will be the final part I do on the camouflage. I kind of lost a video there for a second, but I'll go ahead and dry brush all this. So I'll go ahead and at the end of everything, like when I paint the road wheels and all that kind of stuff, this is a lighter dry brush than the one before. But I'll go ahead and dry brush everything with a final layer of Iraqi sand. And that goes ahead and makes it, again, it ties in all like the black parts you'll paint. If you go ahead and put on decals, it really helps tie those in, because it, again, it adds a constant color on top. And this is, I'm going to say the camouflage is good for now.